When I was a boy, I wanted to maximize my impact on the world. And I was smart enough to realize that I am not very smart. And that I have to build a machine that learns to become much smarter than myself, such that it can solve all the problems that I cannot solve myself, and I can retire. And my first publication on that dates back 30 years, 1987, my diploma thesis, where I already tried to solve the grand problem of AI. Not only build a machine that learns a little bit here and learns a little bit there, but also learns to improve the learning algorithm itself. And the way it learns, and so on recursively, without any limits except the limits of logics and physics. And I'm still working on the same old thing, and I'm still pretty much saying the same thing, except that now more people are listening. Because the learning algorithms that we have developed on the way to this goal, they are now on 3,000 million smartphones. And all of you have them in your pockets. What you see here are the 5 most valuable companies of the Western world: Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon. And all of them are emphasizing that AI, artificial intelligence, is central to what they are doing. And all of them are using heavily the deep learning methods that my team has developed since the early 90s in Munich and in Switzerland. Especially something which is called the long short-term memory. Has anybody in this room ever heard of the long short-term memory, or the LSTM? Hands up. Anybody ever heard of that? Okay. Has anybody never heard of the LSTM? Okay. I see we have a third group in this room who didn't understand the question. That every 5 years computers are getting 10 times cheaper, which is an old trend that has held since 1941 at least, since this man, Konrad Zuse, built the first working program-controlled computer in Berlin. And he could do roughly 1 operation per second, 1. And then 10 years later, for the same price, one could do 100 operations. 30 years later, 1 million operations for the same price. And today, after 75 years, we can do 1 billion times as much for the same price. And the trend is not about to stop, because the physical limits are much further out there. Rather soon, in not so many years, or decades, we will for the first time have little computational devices that can compute as much as a human brain. And if the trend doesn't break, 50 years later, there will be a little computational device for the same price that can compute as much as all 10 billion human brains taken together. And there will not only be one of those devices, but many, many, many. Everything is going to change. So, a couple of decades, nobody knows exactly when we will have true AGI, but we are not talking about centuries, we are talking about decades. Okay. Yes, and many are going to see it.
Okay, so if
many in this room.
Many in this room, okay. Yeah. So,
and normally you need a trained doctor, a trained histologist who is able to detect the dangerous cancer cells or pre-cancer cells. Now, our stupid network knows nothing about cancer, it knows nothing about vision, it knows nothing in the beginning, but we can train it to imitate the human teacher, the doctor. And it became as good or better than the best competitors. And very soon, all of medical diagnosis is going to be superhuman. And it's going to be mandatory, because it's going to be so much better than the doctors.
One last question for you. what advice do you have, if any, to politicians today who are facing almost a cacophony of noise around AI and what it means for us?
Yeah.
And I think your point around goal conflict is a very interesting one. But politicians are looking for job creation, improved quality of living, GDP growth, and so on. And here we face this accelerating arrival of automation, AI. Maybe it's 2 decades away. How should they do their jobs and provide a path for us all going forward?
Yeah. I think one problem with the politicians is that most of them have a very short time horizon, because the next election is about 2 years away on average, which means that they will think on average about 2 years ahead and not a couple of decades as what is needed in this scenario. Now, one of the most important challenges for policymakers is actually connected to our next panel, which is about education. Because how do you educate kids in an environment like this, where other new types of beings, new types of life are emerging and going to be smarter in many ways than the kids? And how do you train people in such an environment? Currently, we have a school system where the plans are made at a certain point in time and then are supposed to stay in place for decades, and this is very inappropriate. Now, one has to think as a politician on how to more quickly adapt education to the needs of this rapidly changing world. Now, I asked myself, is it really true? Is there such a pattern in history that fits that idea of a singularity, a historic singularity? And yes, there is one. And it's amazing how simple it is. It turns out, if you take as a basic interval a human lifetime, which takes 80 years, then the nth main chapter of history in the history books, you just open a history book, is 2 to the n human lifetimes before omega, the singularity, which is for some reason in 2014.